Today's Bible passage is from the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 5 to 12. Paul says, "We have this treasure in clay jars." Paul's well-known remark about the fragility of humankind is particularly apposite at present. Clay jars, or earthenware vessels, so easy to smash, fragile, vulnerable, brittle, short-lived. As we battle the COVID-19 virus, invisible and microscopic in size, yet immensely powerful in causing illness and even death, and in disrupting human life right across the planet, we are aware afresh, perhaps really for the first time, of our own vulnerability. It's a hard lesson to learn, as we tend to think of ourselves as powerful in the world, competent to protect ourselves against pretty much any threat or danger. Sorted, basically. How wrong can you be? And how important for us to recognise our limitations and weaknesses, to be realistic about ourselves. The ancient classical myths always showed how human hubris would get its comeuppance, a sort of rough justice, like the Tower of Babel story in the Old Testament as well. And we still suffer from hubris if we're not careful. Paul was not aiming to depress when he used this phrase about clay jars. On the contrary, he was rejoicing in his weakness, as it threw into clear relief the victory of the gospel. All that was being achieved through the preaching of the gospel was to be ascribed not to the human mouthpieces, agents, those clay jars, but to God. And he claimed that as an advantage, because it meant that no one could possibly think that he and his fellow workers could claim any credit for themselves. He went on to describe how they were continually beaten down and suffered oppression and many obstacles and difficulties, and yet still the gospel was proclaimed. He identified with the suffering of Jesus, even to the risk of death, while seeing that the good news of salvation and life still came across. And he said, "So death is at work in us, and life in you." In the end, of course, Paul did die for his faith. We assume he was executed in Rome after his long imprisonment there. I can't help thinking today of the frontline workers who are saving lives now, bringing salvation and health to others at the risk of their own health, and poignantly thinking too of those health workers who have caught the virus and died of it, who've paid the ultimate price in the course of serving others. Death is at work in us, but life in you. We continue to pray for all those on the front line, as well as applauding them on Thursday evenings. They are clay jars, fragile, yet full of love, and ready to pour out care to strangers in need, to spend and to be spent. May God richly bless them and prosper their work.